This video is to show how to assemble the fuel pump and filter package that I sell. But I guess first let's discuss the three different ways that I sell this package. So one way is just like you see it here on the table, just parts, all parts. And I send it to you, and using this video instructions, you're able to assemble this thing yourself and save a considerable amount of money that way. Or if you're not comfortable with doing the assembly, then I go ahead and I do that as well, and I sell it as a fully assembled package, completely ready to bolt in. You just receive it, unpackage it, bolt it into the truck, and I'll explain here in a little bit how to connect to the existing fuel lines on the truck. And then the third way that I sell it is just as a bracket kit only. Some folks I know like to do their own filtration and pump mechanisms themselves. And so I set this kit up over here to come just as you're seeing it in the camera right now, just as a bracket kit only, which includes the aluminum bracket, the U-bolts back there to hold it to the frame, the two U-straps there to hold the pump to the bracket itself, and then the nuts and the bolts on there to hold everything together. So in a few moments, as we go through the video, you'll see how all of these pieces come together. So briefly to describe what I'm using the Napa or Wix-based filter bases here, the 4770s. I'm using as the pre-filter the 3367, which is a water separator, and then as the post-filter, the final filtration, the 3528. I'm going with the Carter Super Duty replacement pump. It seems to be a really good pump. The Bosch is probably the next, potentially equal in quality or maybe slightly better. It depends on whose opinion you want to listen to. And then there's a variety of other pumps out there that you can use as well. I've standardized on this Carter. Additionally, in here are some hoses. There's two shorts, two longs. The fittings that accompany those hoses, fittings for in the filter bases, and then some additional over here that go into the pump. These two go in the pump, these two in the pump, and then these four over here make up the connection to the lines on the truck itself. So let's walk through the process now and start the assembly. Alright, first thing we're going to do is the rubber hoses and get the fittings on the ends of the hoses. The two short hoses we're going to do fittings on both ends, and with the two longer hoses we're going to do fittings on just one end for now, until we get everything mounted up in the truck and figure out what the length is, what ideal length is for those longer hoses, and then we'll trim them to fit, perfectly in the truck, and then we'll come back later and put the fittings on the ends of those two longer hoses. So the trick here, just clamp the fitting in a vise, bench vise preferably. Just a little squirt of WD-40 on there makes all the difference, and then just push that guy straight on. It will have a tendency to turn in the vise, so as straight as you can until you've come up to the yellow plastic piece on the fitting. Here, I'll do one more real quick. This is the Instagrip type hose, so there's no clamps required. A little bit of WD-40. Try to get it into the end of the hose as well. And then again, just straight on. Until it comes up to the plastic there. We're all the way in. So there we go. There's our first hose assembly. I'll go ahead and do the others here as well. But again, InstaConnect hose, as you can see written on there, Instagrip. So there's no clamps needed. And this guy will never let go out of there. I've tried pull tests before, and it does not come out. So let me go ahead and get the other ones done, and then we'll move on to the next step of the assembly. Okay, we've got the hose assemblies put together. You can see them there in the background. The two short hoses have fittings on both ends, and the two longer hoses have fittings on just one end. And then later, when we figure out the proper length for them, we'll cut them and then put the other two fittings on the other ends. In the foreground here, we've got the filter base, one of them, sitting here ready for assembly, and we're going to talk here how to assemble it, where to move the fittings to. So when you get it out of the box, it'll have the two plugs on one side, and then the other side will just be empty. If you can see in the camera here, there are arrows. This one points inward, and opposite side points inward as well. So these are the in ports coming into the filter, and then these two arrows point outward. Those are the flow coming out of the filter after the fuel's been filtered. So what we're going to do is move this plug right here, just dead opposite. So this is the plug that is on the outbound side of the filter. The arrow's pointing outward, and we're going to move him over to this side here. Of course, we'll put sealant on it. Okay, and then the 90-degree fittings will screw in, and they will just face, when we put them in, they'll face opposite of the flange mounting surface here. They will face away. Sorry, I keep getting too close to the camera with it as I'm working on it. So when this one goes in, it'll look the same. It'll look just like that right there. And we will assemble both of them the exact same way. So here is the other one I've already done. And so if I can get them both in the camera together, you can see they get assembled identical. So there's no confusing them when you go to assemble it onto the bracket. There's no one that's supposed to go on the pre-filter side or one that specifically goes on the post-filter side. So the sealant I'm using, Napa/Permatex 765-1188. It is diesel rated. It's really good stuff. Been using it for a while. Haven't had any complaints or problems with leaks because of the sealant. So let me go ahead and get one to the point of starting to assemble it here in the vise with the sealant. Now I say to use a vise only to do the 90 degrees. Really, you don't need it so much for the plugs. In fact, let's go ahead and do the plugs first, since those are the ones that need to get done first before the 90 degrees. Otherwise, you can't get to one of them. So let me go ahead and just lube one up here just a little bit and get the process started. You know, trying to not make the video longer than it needs to be while you watch me lube up these plugs here. This is the plug, the flat end of the plug. So just with the brush, start brushing this guy on there liberally, making sure to have enough thread sealant on there. So I like to get it just a little thick at the front side here. I pretty much lube the whole thing up, all the threads, and then at the front where it first enters into the fitting, I put sort of a little donut ring, if you will, of thicker sealant going around there, because some of that is going to go into the threads inside of the filter housing here, and so we just want to make sure we get it okay. I'm making a bit of a mess of myself as I go at it. So with the first ones, the plugs, I'm just going to use this wrench assembly here. Go ahead and torque that guy in there. Now this one I do just by hand. I don't put him in the vise at all. You just go until he's snug. You want to be careful. Let me throw up a word of caution with these filter bases. They're cast aluminum and they will crack fairly easily. I have cracked them before. I know they get sort of a bad rap out there. A lot of guys complain they leak. I honestly think it might be user-induced, self-induced. I think guys are torquing too hard on them, getting the fittings into them and causing a hairline crack that they didn't hear. Because I have heard them crack, and when you hear them crack, and you throw them away, you're done. But if you don't hear it crack, you don't know it cracked, I think a lot of guys are cracking them and installing them, and they leak, and then they say, oh, don't buy those filter bases, they're junk. I think it's actually the opposite problem. I think the user is not paying enough attention, torquing a little too hard, and cracking them. Because there's a lot of guys out there that swear by them, say they're perfectly fine, and obviously those are the ones that didn't get cracked. So I'll lube up here now the 90 degree a little bit. We'll do this one, get it stuck in there so I can show you a little bit better how to be somewhat cautious with this, because this you want facing in a specific direction. And so as it gets tight in there, you want to make sure you're close to the direction you want it facing, because you can't just keep torquing it in there, spin it around until it's facing where you want it to. Otherwise you risk cracking the base. So we definitely don't want to do that. Sorry, give me just another second here. Okay. Lubed up certainly well enough. We're going to go in on the same side where we have the plug now, because we do the plug first and then we come back and we do the 90 degrees after. So spin in there for a little bit by hand, no problem. Okay, getting tight by hand right now. This is the direction I want it facing. If it's tight by hand right now, I'm only going to bring it around one more time with the wrench. Let me go ahead and get it set up in the base here real quick, and then I can show you me torquing it in there. Okay, so when you hold it in the vise, obviously don't hold it where the filter is going to seal. That would be foolish. So we'll get it in there. Tilt back here just a little bit. Okay, I'm only going to bring this around one more time with the vise, or with the wrench rather. I want it facing opposite of the mounting plate area. Sorry about that, the camera gave up on me while we were putting that last fitting in. So I got it in on the other side, you can see. And again, it's to face directly 180 degrees away from the mounting base or mounting side of it. So now we'll go ahead and get the other one torqued in here. And all I'm really trying to emphasize here is to use some caution, right? I've just got it started in here. As you put these guys in, there can be a tendency to crack these bases. So again, right there, it's getting tight by hand. So now we give it a feel with the wrench, and there's a likeliness that I can't really come around one more time. Well, I guess I can. One more time. That's tight. I'm pushing tight right now on it. Real tight. So that's it. That's all I'm going to give it. Okay. And we're 180 degrees opposite. Let's pull it out of the vise. You can see that better. Maybe not perfectly, because again, you want to use caution. Might be pointing slightly upward or slightly downward. That's okay, as long as it's opposite, both of them, opposite of the mounting base, mounting side. Don't want to crack. It will crack usually right at the top up here. These guys will crack. So there we go. We got the two plugs in, both sides, and we got the 90-degree fittings in, both sides. Both are assembled identically the same. Okay, now depending, if you are buying this kit from me, this part of the process or part of the job is already done. But for those that might be wanting to acquire all the parts themselves and do this, this is going to be the fitting that screws onto the end of the Carter pump. This is an O-ring boss. This side here is, I've taken the O-ring off at the moment for putting it into the lathe here and drilling it out. The hole through the center is pretty small. The output side of the pump, where this fitting goes, is 7/32 in size, and this one I think is something closer down around an 1/8 inch. So what we want to do is enlarge that to match. We can come up to 7/32 just fine. It doesn't interfere with the integrity of the threads of the fitting here. So let me go ahead and get this guy set into the lathe here. And the reason I like to use the lathe for the job is I get dead center. You can use a drill press just fine. It's just a little bit harder in a drill press or a mill to get on center. That's what the lathe is designed to do. So let's go ahead and just drill this guy out real quick here. Okay, there we go. I'll clean it up real good before I put the O-ring back on. Let's go ahead and pull them out of there and clean up some of the burrs and whatnot around it. But now we've got a hole coming through our fitting that mounts on the back of the pump that matches the output of the pump. So we're getting a good amount of flow through there. There's no issue with restriction down at the pump. That would be sort of silly, wouldn't it, for our e-fuel conversion to be immediately restricted right at the pump. Okay, let's move on. Next up, we're going to assemble some of the fittings that will be part of the pump, the fuel pump, and as well the two fittings that will tie you into the truck's fuel lines, both coming into the filter pump assembly and then going out of the filter pump assembly to the engine. So what we're going to have is 3 compression fittings and conversion little fittings that go on the end of them to take them from a pipe thread on one side to a -6 AN on the other side. That's those 3. And then over here we've got the fitting that we just machined out on the lathe over there, and as well again a pipe fitting to an AN fitting that screws into it. Okay, so let me go ahead and basically get the Permatex out again, put it on all the pipe threads, and then just screw all these guys together and to make up the 4 little fitting assemblies that we need to get the pump installed in there. So let me go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back. Okay, now we have the 4 little assemblies put together. It's 3 compression fittings. This end here is the compression fitting. Up here to a little converter that is a 6 AN. We have 3 of those, and you'll see there's a little bit of sealant showing, so we know we got them sealed up good. And then the 4th is O-ring boss, this side, that one that we drilled out on the lathe, to a -6 AN, and again a little bit of sealant on there. These 2, one of the compression to AN6 and the O-ring boss to AN6, we're going to use right now on the pump. The other 2 we're going to put aside over here with the hose assemblies. Those are going to get used on the fuel lines that are on the truck itself to convert the line on the truck where we cut it to have -AN6 connection points on them. So let's grab the pump. Again, the Carter pump. Pull them up out of the box here. A couple things in the box. 1, the pump itself, and then 2, the foam vibration absorbing pad, a few other fittings, the screws and the washers that go on the electrical connection side of the pump are in there. For now we're just going to put the bag aside. Going to pull the pump out of the bag. Gracefully. Okay, and you can almost see what's going to happen here. So this is O-ring boss, so no thread sealant is needed. It has an O-ring on it. That guy's going to go straight into the end of the pump right there. Okay, again, words of caution here. When you tighten that guy down, it's an O-ring seating, not a pipe thread. So there's no reason to torque on that guy excessively. I'm just going to grab a 5/8 wrench onto the pump side, just grab a crescent, and then just torque it till it's snug. There you go. That's all it needs right there. The O-ring will do the sealing. Okay. Little tag on there indicates the plus side, so let's go ahead and keep that on. On the pump itself, it's stamped into the casing. The camera can see the little plus symbol. There's a negative symbol on the other side, so you can't forget or can't not know which one's plus, which one's minus if you lose the tag off of there. The other side of the pump, which is the input side, the intake side, pull the little rubber cap off of it. The compression fitting is going to go on there, just like so. Now with the compression fitting, I've mentioned this before in some of my other videos, same sort of thing here. Don't over torque, because what happens, there's a steel ferrule inside of there, and that's your crushing down basically. And so if you over torque it, it will actually crush the tubing of the motor. So what I'm doing now is I'm checking my looseness or tightness on the pump yet as I begin torquing this compression fitting down. That ferrule in there is going to start tightening up. I saw the pump turn, so I'm getting tight on the pump now. So once that's, I consider that to be snug once you get to that point. And so now all you want to do, honestly, is just go a little bit past snug, which is where I'm at right now. That's maybe another full turn altogether past snug. Assemble it like that. Check for leaks. If it leaks, snug it down a little bit more. If you tighten that thing on there too tight, it deforms the pipe of the pump, the part that you're trying to clamp onto deforms it, puts a little kink in it, and it just leaks right past that little kink, and then it comes running out of the compression fitting, and it just makes a bad day. So go to snug, and then just a little bit past snug, and you're done. So there we are with the pump. It's all pre-assembled now with its fittings on the end. We're now -AN6 on both sides of the pump, so we can connect our lines up to it very, very easily. So let's move on now, and we'll start assembling the parts onto the bracket. No real set order on how to assemble the bracket, whether we put the motor on first, the pump, or the filter bases. But what I'll do is I'll do the pump first, because while I'm thinking of a detail, we can talk about it here. So the pump, here it is again. On the side where the electrical connectors are, this is the output side. There's a little arrow on there. Don't know if the camera can see it, but it's pointing in this direction. That's telling me which way the flow is through the pump. So it's picking up on this side, flowing through, and coming out the side where the electrical connectors are. The reason I want to mention this, if you have a regular cab, four-wheel drive, a lot of times there's no room on the frame rail, on the inside of the frame rail, if you will, on the transmission engine side, because the transfer case gets in the way, and so you need to mount this on the outside of the frame rail, basically underneath the driver's door. When you do that, if you were to mount this, let's pretend for a moment here that the backboard of this workbench is the frame rail, and we're underneath the truck. Normally you would mount it just like that against the frame rail, underneath the truck, and the motor would mount going like this. This would be towards the front of your truck, this side here, and the opposite side, this side, would be towards the fuel tanks or towards the selector switch. So that just makes sense. This would be your pre-filter hanging on this side. This would be your post-filter on this side. You'd be pulling fuel from the tank, coming in, going to the engine. If you're reversed and you switch this around and you mount it on the other side of the frame rail, the outside of the frame rail, opposite side of this board, then the pump would now be facing this direction. If it were mounted still the same, now you'd be pumping towards the back of the truck, or you'd be pumping towards the tanks, and you'd be picking up fuel on this side from the engine. So that doesn't make sense. So you would want to mount your motor and switch your filters around as well to be facing the other direction on it, so that you're then pumping towards the motor like you would normally be. So if we switch this back around to the more typical installation for extended cabs, crew cabs, etc., and bring the pump back around, you can see I'm switched. I want to be mounted back on the bracket this direction, so I'm once again pumping towards the engine, this side, picking up from the tanks on that side. Okay, so let's real quickly here mount this guy on there. There's a pair of 1/4-inch bolts, and I use the nylon lock nuts on there, so they're vibration resistant and won't necessarily come loose on you. There's a pair of loop connectors. We're beginning to get out of the camera's view there. The loop connectors that'll hold on the pump, and then with the pump came that foam neoprene rubber that we're going to use. So real quick and simple, the neoprene is going to go around the pump. You're going to want to be able to get to your electrical connectors, so you may have to slide the pump in and out of there once you're underneath the truck, which means you may have to loosen or tighten the bolts that hold it in there. I've got it set up so that it mounts hanging downward this direction. And that will just go right on there, just like so. Real quick here, I won't torque everything down. That'll just be time consuming to do. But once we get in there, you'll see you still have freedom to slide the pump forward and aft in order to get the electrical wires connected up once you're underneath the truck. Just hold that there briefly and throw the nut on the back here real quick. Okay. And then the other one here, briefly. Get this guy as well started, just so you get the general idea of what we're doing here. And in there we go. Okay. So, a little sloppy hanging right now until you tighten everything down, but that's the general idea with the pump. There's your electrical connectors. We've got this guy setting up for more of an extended cab, crew cab, so that he's pumping from left to right as we look at the bracket from this direction. The bases, again, we assembled those so that they're not specific for one side or the other. They're identical when we look at them this way. And so they can mount on either side. It doesn't matter which way you flip them on there. You're going to have a pair of 5/16 studs and one 5/16 bolt. And then you'll have 5 nuts associated with them. Again, they are a nylon inserted lock nut so that they don't vibrate loose. And what we do there is the 2 studs go in the bottom holes. So, try to keep a view in the camera here as I'm working. So the studs, they got to go in first. And the reason, just the way the base assembly is made, you can't. There's not a bolt, a long bolt to go through the 2 of them together. Isn't going to fit into the assembly of the base. So let me go ahead and plug both of them on here 1 second, kind of get an idea of what we're doing as we walk through the process. So now the bases are just hanging on those studs right now. So what I do is I come back in, sort of center them up, I guess, a little bit, looking at it in the bases. There we go. And we're going to put a nut on one side of the stud and a nut on the other side of the stud. And then we'll work the nuts on there until they're sort of evenly placed onto the studs. And get this nut going over here. And a nut going on this one. Fine. What's most important, it doesn't matter how even you have the studs. You just want to make sure you get a few threads through the nylon locks on both sides here, so that the studs, the nuts won't slip off either side of the stud. And then finally the 5/16 bolt. It doesn't matter which side you come through one side or the other. And then again, there's a lock nut, nylon lock nut to go onto that. And then that sort of completes the bolt together parts of the assembly. So let me tilt back here and you can see it. So there it is, leaned up against our pseudo frame rail back there, the backboard of the workbench here. I'll go ahead and tighten up some things here now, and so that we can finish showing how to get the hoses and stuff on there, and then what completes the final installation. Be right back. Got everything mounted on there tight. Let's take a quick look and see. So again, we've got the studs put up in there. Let's come a little bit closer. So the 4 nuts on each side. You might find you need to get a pair of pliers or something when you're trying to get enough thread sticking out of each lock nut to make sure you have the nylon nut locks in there really good and tight. And then the 1 bolt on the top up here obviously doesn't need anything like that. The motor is mounted in there. Spacing it left to right, you just kind of center it the best that you can. You want to keep the openings here, the slits that they have cut, so that you can get your wires onto the studs in there. When you go and put your wires on there, do be careful again torquing down on these studs. Very easy to snap these things right off the motor, and then you're in a world of hurt. So gently torque those down. There's a lock nut that's in there with them, so you really don't have to go too tight. But everything's tightened down on there. The 2 nuts on the back here for the pump. So let's go ahead and take a look now what it'll look like with the filter assembly. We'll start off with the pre-filter, the 3367. Let me go ahead and get that out of the container here. Peeling the plastic off of it. Alright, so again, depending on which way you need to set up your flow, typically only with the standard cab 4-wheel drives do you need to sort of reverse things, because you're going to mount on the outside of the frame rail. The pre-filter is going to hang on what would be the left side of the assembly, and this would be the side facing the selector switch. So it sort of makes it intuitive as to which side your pre-filter should go on. This again is the intake side of the pump. So this fitting on the top is going to go back and tie to the frame fuel line, the fuel line on the frame, pulling the fuel in to the pre-filter, then out of here and into the pump, and so on. So post filter 3528. Go ahead and pull him out. Screw him in on the other side. Now, when I ship these things out fully assembled, I leave the filters loose, and I leave the two lines coming in for the frame rail connections loose as well. The reason I leave the filters loose is you should fill these up with diesel fuel before trying to run the pump. Trying to prime the pre-filter through using the pump when it's dead empty is not a good idea. It puts a lot of extra heat and strain on the pump trying to pull fuel. So it's best to fill the pre-filter first. This way the pump gets fuel right away as soon as you start it, and it primes the system out much faster. Same with filling up the post filter. It just helps to prime the whole system out much quicker, much safer way to go about it. The two short lines that we had put fittings on both ends, we're just going to take those, pretty intuitive I think at this point, off of the pre-filter and then down to the pump. These you can torque on there good and tight. They're brass, so if you go too hard you will strip them out. But you don't have to go too tight. It's a 37 degree AN flare fitting, so they seal up very, very well. Okay, so now here's our pump assembly package. Pretty well complete here. The last thing that we would do is take the longer line, and once we get into the mounted in the truck here, then we'll know what length to cut them at. So we go ahead and, for now, like I said, screw it on there. Alright, so let's pretend for a moment that we've made our way into the truck, and then once again this backboard of this workbench is our frame rail. So we would mount this guy, just make sure our camera's seeing everything that we want it to see. Tilt back here just a little bit. Alright, so we would come in with on the frame rail, and we're going to use our big old U-bolts, and those will just go right into the assembly there. And you would bolt yourself onto the frame. Sorry, that's the second time the camera's cut out on us during the making of the video. But as I was saying, the U-bolts, as we were just showing, are just going to mount, hold this right to the frame rail, just like that. Again, these come with a nylon lock nut, stainless steel by the way. All the hardware I use is stainless steel. These are a replacement than what these ship with from where I buy them, so this is something extra that I add, is the nylon lock, just to be sure nothing's going to vibrate loose on you over time. And finally, once you have that sitting in the truck, again our backboard is our pretend frame rail. You're going to take the two longer hoses now and adjust them to length to what best fits in the truck, up to where you want to cut the fuel lines that exist in the truck, the steel fuel lines, and adding the compression fittings onto those steel lines. Same sort of technique. Torque, but don't over torque. Go to snug, go a little past snug. Check for leaks before you torque it any tighter. And then you'll cut these to length and use a good sharp utility knife when doing that. And then, as the technique we showed over there in the vise, to press these fittings, the remaining two fittings, onto the hose end to make it fit in the truck perfect the way you want it. So there we are. That completes the assembly instructions for this pump filter package. Again, my email address is always at the front of these videos, so feel free to reach out anytime with any questions you have, and I'll be more than happy to help.